All right, last week, President Bola Tinubu, as you heard, clearly declared open a cabinet retreat for his 48 ministers, presidential aides, permanent secretaries, and top government officials to set the tone for his presidency with a renewed hope agenda, which will focus on 8 priority areas, which are the economy, security, energy, infrastructure and transportation, education, health and social investment, diversification through industrialization, and improved governance. President Tinubu charged the ministers to help him in the realization of the goals, even as he chastised them to either deliver or be fired. President Tinubu added that all participants at the 3-day retreat will, among other things, sign the ministerial performance bond, which will be periodically reviewed. The president also announced the establishment of the Results Delivery Unit to be headed by his special advisor on policy coordination, Hadiza Bala Usman, to measure the performance of ministers and other top government officials in serving his administration. Now, the retreat is over. My question is, what's next? Do the ministers now understand what the president wants to and how they will achieve them? That's what he wants to achieve and how they will achieve them. How do we gauge impact and measure their KPIs? How does the presidency ensure that there is policy coordination, collaboration, and effective execution of policies? These questions and more will be what I'll be asking my guest, a former Director General of the BPSR Bureau for Public Service Reforms, the Country Director of DAI, and a governance expert, Dr. Joe Abah, the Ezemo himself. Doctor, good to see you.
Good to see you, Nancy.
How are you? It's been a while. It's been a while. I've spoken to you. I think the last time I spoke to you on this show was 3 years ago during COVID.
That's
and it
correct.
was a virtual interview.
That's correct.
So it's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you so much.
You're
my first TV interview for about 2 years.
Yes. So what did I do? I said yesterday on Twitter, I said, the gods have smiled on me. What happened?
You're my sister. I can't say no to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. Now, let's get started. We have so many things to talk about, and I hope that we're able to exhaust them within the next few minutes. Of course, when President Tinubu announced there would be a cabinet retreat, my mind just went a lot of places. And let me explain as to why, if retreats do matter. I remember Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister, had a retreat, I think, sometime this year, some weeks ago or so. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, the same thing. President Obasanjo started that since the Democratic rule. We saw a few things happening even after ministerial retreat. President Obasanjo hired and fired. He reshuffled his cabinet. President Yar'Adua, the same thing. President Jonathan, I think he also had a retreat. President Buhari even had retreats and even had what he called ministerial or even sectorial retreats. But we saw that he was able to just fire 2 ministers that were not doing well at that time. President Tinubu now. My first question to you is that, do retreats really matter? Because I've seen that presidents around the world do that, but do they really matter?
Perhaps you shouldn't just look at them as retreats where people go away into a secluded location away from away from disturbance, but see this particular one more as an induction exercise, because you get appointed minister. It doesn't matter your background. Nothing prepares you for the public service. You'll actually be quite shocked at some of the strictures around the public service, because you're dealing with public money. So you can't just come from the private sector, think that it's a good idea, go down the road and buy a car, even if it's cheaper than you would have bought it in government. Public money has to be spent in particular ways. So take it as an induction, because this particular retreat that I had the privilege of facilitating the whole of the first day had people talking about, okay, this is your relationship, this is how to manage the relationship between the ministers and the permanent secretaries. And then you had a public procurement expert coming to say these are the issues in public procurement, and this is what you can do and not do. You had the Accountant General of the Federation coming to talk about how public accounts work. You had the chairpersons of EFCC and ICPC come to talk to them about the consequences of, excuse me, of not following due process. You had a lot of people come to share experience, and then you also had the permanent secretaries in the room. And, you know, like you said, the performance bond that the president signed was actually signed between the president, the minister, and the permanent secretary. Okay. So take it as an induction retreat. The governors do it as well, and I think they do theirs quite well. Yeah. They actually do theirs when the governors are still governors-elect, and they inform them about what to expect. Usually they don't pay too much attention. Excuse me, my throat gets cold in the morning.
Yes, sorry.
Usually they don't pay too much attention because they're just waiting to get the power. So most things you're saying they're not hearing it, which is why the NGF also then has a follow-on retreat like 6 months afterwards, where they would have got their feet under the table, they know what they're doing, and then they can ask more intelligent questions. So yes, retreats do matter. Of course, they need to be planned very carefully. They need to target the things that you want to convey, and there is safe space during which people can ask questions. So apart from the opening and closing of the retreat, the rest of it was a closed session where people were able to talk freely.
What were your takeaways? Because I know that you facilitated, you were also a moderator, perhaps at a few sessions. What were your key takeaways from that? I asked the question earlier on as an intro here that the retreat has been done and dusted. I suppose that the ministers will now have an idea of what the president wants to do and how he wants to achieve them. So what were your takeaways from that retreat? How did you look at, what was the posture of the officials in the room and even the body language? When I moderate a lot of events, and when I'm moderating, I'm also watching the posture of people, my audience in the room. Some will even be on their phones, some are doing, some are doing different things. And I'll be like, okay. When you fall into that position, I try to bring back attention. I say, guys, we are here for serious business.
Absolutely.
So what were your own, what did you observe as a moderator and as facilitator?
Okay, first of all, the fact that the president was there in person with the secretary to government, and all the officials were there.
Was it there on the first day or for the 3 days?
He was there for the 3 days.
Okay.
But I only moderated the first day.
Okay.
He left at we started at about 10 o'clock. We didn't finish until about 7:45 at night on that first day. And because of the nature of what we're discussing, he actually got a message through to me that I shouldn't rush the sessions, that what we're discussing were very, very important.
That's the president himself?
The president himself,
okay.
Yes, and that he wanted everybody to be fully engaged. The exchanges were lively, particularly from those ministers that were a bit more experienced in the public service. So they asked a number of questions. The head of service of the Federation was also there. I think initially they found the usual surprise when you're appointed minister, that you are not actually as powerful as you think, and that there are institutions that constrain you. So, for instance, your permanent secretary is the accounting officer, and so many of them couldn't understand why they couldn't be the accounting officers. And, various people had to explain that, look, there are checks and balances, and being an accounting officer is actually not such a fun thing, because if you've ever been an accounting officer like I have, that responsibility stays with you for the rest of your life. Until you die, someone can look into how you manage the government accounts. And it also helps to balance the power of the minister. The former Senate President and former SGF, Senator Pius Ahim, relayed a story where a minister wanted to go on a foreign trip with a very large entourage. And the permanent secretary said, no, I cannot justify this to the public. You need to go and trim down the size of your your entourage. And of course, you know, a newly appointed minister cannot understand that. I thought you said I'm the chief executive, I can do and undo. Does it mean the permanent secretary is more powerful than I am? No, the permanent secretary is not more powerful than the minister. The permanent secretary has a responsibility to account to the public for how the funds are used. And therefore, where the relationship works well, it's actually one of mutual respect.
Okay, that's quite interesting. One takeaway from you now is that because on Friday, was it on Friday? On Wednesday last week, the retreat started, and I spoke to a presidential aide, a special assistant to the president on media and publicity here, when the retreat started, and I asked him if the president was going to stay for the 3 days. So this feedback is really good in terms of president was there for the 3 days, because I said it that day that there was really no essence that you are doing a retreat. You are the chief executive officer of the company. You need to articulate your vision to the team. So for the president to have sat through the 3 days, quite interesting, because we see that government officials, and I've called them out on this show, they go for functions that affect their ministry or even their department. You see the minister will just come. After giving opening speech or welcome remark, they leave. And we're all in the room talking to ourselves. And the problem continues to be there year in, year out. So
no, this was very different. I mean, the president was there on the first day that I was there till about 4 o'clock in the evening. You know, we broke for lunch and, you know, he had to go do other things. But yes, he was fully engaged, and he did, the message he sent was, you know, we should carry on the discussions, and if he has any particular questions, he would ask. And so, yeah, so he was quite engaged.
Now, let's take a look at the president's speech, because for those of us that were not in the room, what we saw also was the president's speech. You were in the room. What were your takeaways from that president's speech? Because what Nigerians saw was like, okay, this is a man that has articulated his vision, and he told the ministers, guys, if you don't perform, you will leave. If you need help, I will help you. We can look at it together. I am not an island. I don't have monopoly of knowledge. But if you don't deliver, I'm going to fire you. So how did the minister, how did the people in the room take it? And did it also come up during conversations, during the plenaries?
Well, let me start with the second but last question. How did the people in the room take it? Well, a way in which somebody, at least one person in the room, took it, which was the Minister of Aviation, was to go back to his agencies and say, and told them, look, this is what we have to deliver.
If you don't deliver, I will fire you.
Yeah, I'll fire you. I will not wait to be fired because of you. So, of course, people took it quite seriously. And I've moderated these ministerial retreats under previous presidents. I think I did 2 or 3 with President Buhari. The one major difference, I would say, is that the president identified someone in the person of the special advisor on policy and coordination, my sister Adiza, to actually drive this and announce it in front of everybody and say, look, this is the person that's going to drive it, and if you have any problems, come to me. You know, if you have any problems with her, come to me. And the fact that the SA policy and coordination also sits in cabinet. That's the first time that somebody driving this kind of thing would actually sit in cabinet and have the public backing of the president. So I think that was quite instructive for me. And just back to your question about the retreats, I think the president made a joke about having retreated, we're now going forward. And so I think the expectations were very clear on what people needed to deliver. But I think in these kinds of things, there's still a need to bring it down to the level that the public can understand and hold people accountable. So if you look at the 8 priority areas and the 8 focus areas, there are a number of indicators, a number of targets. But I think we need to bring it down to, you know, 2 or 3 things per area that the public can just, if you ask anyone, when we did it in the UK, it was fairly straightforward. The targets were nobody should wait more than 4 hours to see a doctor. in a public hospital. With the trains should not be late more than 90% of the time. Anyone could tell you what those targets are. So if you translate that to our environment here, there should be straightforward things like every Nigerian should have X number of hours of electricity in a day. Forget all the jargon about megawatts and transmission. And you know, that's just how many hours of electricity can we expect to have each day. If you go to education, the key issues are the number of children that are out of school and the ability of kids to read and write quickly at a particular age. So I think we still need to crystallize it, you know, those large number of targets and indicators into a few in each of the target areas that anybody you stop on the street in Nigeria can tell you this is where we're going.
Okay, I will come back to this issue in terms of how this administration, the president and his aides, can articulate their policies in terms of information management. Yeah. I hope I remember. I'll talk about that. But I want us to go back to Hadiza Bala Usman's, she's the special advisor on policy and formulation. And when the president announced that, something came to my head. Results delivery units, of course, fantastic, to be headed by her. What is expected from her office vis-a-vis that there is a secretary to the government of the federation? The SGF, whose office description is to coordinate and supervise activities of the MDAs and implementation of government policies and programs. That is what the SGF office is for. Then what also came to my mind is the role of the BPSR as a public institution that was also created to do this. Then there is also Sevicom. Sevicom was created in 2004, if I'm not, yes. Sevicom was created in 2004. The Sevicom is, I think, service compact with all Nigerians. That's the time. So when the president announced it, and those three things flashed through my mind, I was like, come on, why do we need a results delivery unit with a special advisor acting on it when we have organs of government already to do this, that? Perhaps does the president also even understand this? Because that was also an induction for him, even though he's been a governor at the state level. States governors can do anything they like, you know. So speak to me about that, the coalition.
Okay. It's a good question. So give me a minute or so to explain it properly so that it's clear. So there is a central coordination and delivery unit in the office of the SGF that was tracking all these targets up till now. I'm not certain whether the president meant to announce a new unit or was referring to that unit, because that's actually the unit that has been working with Hadiza to design all of this work. So it's left to be seen whether the president had in mind a different unit or he called it a results and delivery unit while referring to the central coordination and delivery unit in the office of the SGF. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that a special assistant to the president is essentially a personal staff of the president, and they can work across governments on various issues on behalf of the president. So you also have special assistants to the president working in the SGF's office. So that's not new. So my brother and friend Ferdinand Agu was special advisor to the president on research and coordination, but stationed in the office of the SGF. So I don't expect that this will be very different. We have some very bright young people that were taken through the lead, what we call the lead P process, that has identified the finest young public servants and brought them together as a cohort. And they are the ones that are in this CCDU function. So I expect that those will be the people that Hadiza will be working with. Indeed, they are already, unless the president decides to do something different, which he has a constitutional right to do. Now, that function is one of tracking and coordination. So here are the priorities that the president has set out. Here are the targets. It's mostly an M&E, a monitoring and evaluation function. Although One of the functions is also to help overcome bottlenecks to why targets are not being delivered. So is that bottleneck in a particular agency, or is it with a particular another organization, or what is it? And then they can bring it to the president to resolve. So that kind of function exists. Now, if you take the Bureau of Public Service Reforms, which I used to run, it is not necessarily a monitoring or evaluation function. It's a reform function to help you do it differently and better. So yes, you're supposed to deliver this. You're struggling to deliver it. And while the CCDU can help remove bottlenecks, it is the job of the Bureau to look at how are you even structured as an organization. How do you train your people? What is the culture of the organization? Is it delivery focused? Is it all of those things? So BPSR actually helps you to do it better so that when they come to monitor you, you're in a better place to perform. So it's almost like an internal think tank that is there to help. Servicom, the Service Compact with all Nigerians, looks at the impact on the streets of what happens.
Service delivery.
Service delivery. So do all of these targets and all of these things and all of these focal areas, does it translate into improved service delivery for citizens when they come in contact with their government? Which is also
necessary.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, the 8 priority areas of Mr. President has to be felt by people on the streets.
Absolutely.
So I can imagine that when Hadiza Osman and her team, all of this, all of these organs should, of course, work, because at the end of the day, you talked earlier on about articulation of information, which I'll come back to later. Let's talk about these KPIs now. How do you think that the president, should these ministers be measured? We know KPIs, of course, the SMART and all of that. You've also been involved in this, and you're a governance expert. Speak to me and Nigerians what those KPIs will really be like. Because even last week when I was interviewing the presidential aide, I was talking about, for those of us in private sector, first of all, it starts from even when you come to work, you just clock in, either you put your hand or you sign. How do you even behave in office? How are letters accepted? You know, all those things. So I'm wondering what it will be like for the public service, where we have seen that perhaps when Minister Omahi resumed as the Minister of Works, he was rudely shocked when his staff were not there on time, and he told them, go back. And Minister Omahi ended up apologizing to these, is it public servants or civil servants now? But civil servants is a subsect of that. And he ended up apologizing. In private sector, that may not have happened. So how do you look at all of this in terms of delivery of KPIs?
Let me first use the opportunity to totally condemn some of what I've seen from the civil service, the Nigerian civil service recently. The loss of discipline has been shocking to me. And I think it's totally unacceptable. And I believe that the head of service will take very firm action about that. We see people leaving organizations and leaving agencies, and there are all sorts of campaigns to try and destroy their legacy and rubbish their name. That's not what you expect from a properly functioning civil service. So I want to plead with the public servants not to destroy the institution that we have. It's just not done. And I know that it's only a few people that are doing this, but I hope that their colleagues can call them to order and let them understand how they are damaging the institution that they work in. But back to your question about the KPIs. I often say to people that in the public sector, it's actually much harder than in the private sector, because in the private sector, you tend to be in control of your organization. I'm in control of the private sector organization that I run. I can hire and fire. I control my budget. I control discipline. In the public service, you have appointments, promotions, and discipline managed by the Federal Civil Service Commission. So the minister cannot hire, he cannot fire anybody. You have the salaries set by the Salaries and Wages Commission, so they can't even say, oh, I'm going to pay this person better because they are better qualified. You have the deployments handled by the Office of the Head of Service. So you have all of this, and then you can't just go out and buy anything you like. And apart from that, the minister is nominally the head of a sector, but there are very many things in that sector that are outside his or her control. So if you have a KPI, for instance, like, improve life expectancy, that's not totally within the minister's control. And so when we've set these KPIs in the past and I've come to measure the ministers, they've said, but how do you expect me to perform? The money was not released. I couldn't hire the kind of people I wanted. I couldn't fire anybody. So how am I expected to perform? Which can be seen as an excuse, but is also a valid reason because of the nature of the environment. So what I often suggest is, yes, ministers are responsible for outcomes because politicians come into office promising a better life. That's what they do. And if you promise a better life, then as a minister, you have a responsibility to help your president to deliver it. So yes, they should be held accountable for that. But we should also design KPIs that are specific in areas in which they have control. So as an example, if you look at the number of inmates awaiting trial, you can have a KPI to say, okay, that should reduce by 50%, because all you need to do is take people to court and have them either prosecuted, convicted, or released. So I think you need to disaggregate them and have certain KPIs that are totally within the minister's control, which you can measure them about. Because some of the KPIs will draw from more than one minister.
Exactly.
As well. Yeah.
They will draw more than one minister, and that brings me to the question of alignment, collaboration, as well as execution of the outcomes that the president wants to see. How do you expect this administration to go about that? For example, you have a minister of communications and innovation, communication, digital economy and innovation, or whatever, Bosun Tijani. You have a minister of science and technology and innovation. When that was announced, I had to ask first, what's the innovation in the two parts? There's science, there's technology in the other one. So how do you, and even the president alluded to it during the presidential retreat, when he mentioned that I'll be the chairman of the boundary commission between the two ministers, as if the president knows that they will still collide, but I will be the referee. So things like that, how do you align? How do you collaborate and execute?
Well, this is where the role of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms comes in, if it's allowed to do it. Because the first thing is to look at the mandates. What are the mandates of these ministries? And many of the ministries that were newly created, I don't know if anyone has actually sat down and mapped their mandates and looked at possible areas of overlap and opportunities for collaboration. So that's the first thing to do, because with every public sector organization, the first place you go to must be your mandate. And that's what has been the problem so far. It's good that the president has set out clear priorities. It's good that he has said, this is the person that will track it, and she has my full backing. What then needs to happen is for each minister to take that back to their ministry, translate this into clear mandates. The performance bond that the minister and the PEMSEC signed, a similar bond should then be signed between the PEMSEC and the directors to their deputies.
Who should initiate that?
The permanent secretary.
Okay, because he himself signed
the permanent secretary is a signatory.
Yes.
And so if you cascade it down from the office of the PEMSEC to all the departments, all the units, then you get to the individual responsibility, so that you come to work on a Monday morning knowing this is my job, this is what I have to do. This is not about schedule now. You know, schedules can be there forever. But this is what I have to contribute if my minister and my PEMSEC are going to deliver what the president wants. And it's very clear in your mind. And so if you did it that way, any ministry that you go to and you have people loitering around, you should actually sanction the permanent secretary and the minister, because, you know, there's so much to do. So that's the way it should work. So first of all is to clarify what the mandate is, where the boundaries are. You may need to come to the Federal Executive Council to negotiate those boundaries, and for the president to, you know, serve as chairman of the Boundary Commission, like you said. And once that is clear, then everybody should simply, you know, take that and go and deliver. There'll always be overlaps. There'll always be areas of clarity. But if everyone is jointly focused on that target, they'll make it happen.
I was actually, I was actually surprised. Not too surprised, but I was a bit, you know. I looked at the president and said, okay, so he's even aware that things like this could happen, that there could be friction, and I will be the referee of two fighting, that there must be two fights, you know, between the ministers. But now let me go back to the question, to the issue around civil servants. And I don't just want it to fly. I don't just want it to go like that. Why is it hard for civil servants in Nigeria to adapt to change? Because I've also heard that part of the problems we have in this country as civil servants. You are a reformer, you are being employed by the president to do a certain job, but the civil servants would not make you work. Civil servants, don't come for me this morning, because we have, like, almost every family has a civil servant, or at least in your extended family. So I understand what we're saying. But this is also what Nigerians are saying. There are a few good ones there. But why are they difficult to adapt to change?
I think your question is premised unfairly. And
Doctor,
the reason...
is it premised unfairly?
I think it is.
They told Governor Umahi, they told him, Mr. Umahi, this is not a Ebonyi State. We don't do things like this. We also saw some things that happened. Was it the woman that was supposed to resume it? Was it NIPOST? We also saw what happened in CAC. Even if you're not happy with your ex-wild boss, there are ways that you can. And social media now has democratized information. Anybody can do anything on social media. But do you understand what I'm trying to say? Because yes. I've also heard ministers, even people in office before, say, our civil service is hard. A file will be on your desk for a long time. Doctor, you know that these things are happening. So don't be politically correct.
No, I'm not being politically correct. I want to be careful to explain.
Okay.
So that you fully understand.
Okay.
And I remember that I had condemned the actions of, you know, those that did these things in CAC and some of those places. So when things are supposed to be condemned, we should condemn them. And I started by doing that before I even said anything else. Now, if you look at the way the civil service functions, they are basically there to help deliver government priorities. You know, support the minister and the government in formulating policy, and then helping to deliver it. You saying civil servants are not adaptable to change is like you blaming your driver. You know, when you have total authority to hire and fire that driver, you have total authority to tell them, go this way instead of that way.
Okay, so
and when you have, for instance, when you have overzealous policemen, like, you know, when I was DG, there was a policeman attached to me, and I think the first day or so, he was pushing people away from the staircase. Our guy is coming, and I'm saying, why are you doing that? The staircase can take 10 people. Lined up together, and you're just going to make these people hate me for no reason. I'm just an ordinary person. Let me climb down. As they're climbing up, it's not a big deal. So you set the tone of the people that work for you. And I think just this constant blame of civil servants is abdicating responsibility for what you know, people who have been given authority to drive change have not been doing so. So I always say that our civil service will work the day we want it to work, the day the political class wants it to work. You cannot pay people peanuts and expect them to perform excellently. You can't, you know, their offices, the toilets smell because nobody has money to clean them. There's no, a number of political appointees swamp the place with consultants, and the civil servants are given nothing to do. They are not able to speak, so they are easy to blame. So I think it's, yes, of course, there are some bad eggs, just like there are in every walk of life. But to be honest with you, in the private sector, if you treat your staff the same way, you will get the same result.
The same result. Okay, you said a few things. Now let's talk about the political will angle, which you talked about earlier. How do you now fortify political will? This was also a question I asked in one of the sessions I moderated, I think about 3 weeks ago at the NESG, because I get to hear so much about is what the political class wants to work, it will work. I moderated a certain event, was it in May, just before the last administration. Governor El-Rufai told me the same thing on the panel. The World Bank chief told me the same thing on the panel. Nancy, until the elites and political class allow for things to work. So what is this?
So you see, it's not me being politically correct.
So how do we fortify political will? President Tinubu is doing his now. How do we fortify that? At the end of the day, these things, these actions, priorities are institutionalized. That the political will is institutionalized. Any other person that comes in will just follow the flow. For those of you that are governance experts.
It's a very important point, but I think you need to unpack what you mean by political will. Because, because political will, even from the #1 citizen, is sometimes not enough. I've had instances where President Buhari has called me on at least twice to say, I want to implement the Orosanye report. It never happened, even though the president wanted to, even though the chief of staff, the late Abah, we've met on several occasions where he's indicated his interest and the president's interest to implement the Orosanye report. It didn't happen. So even political will from the head of government is sometimes not enough, because in a system like ours, power is dispersed. It's not just in one place. You have the political party. If the political party doesn't support restructuring, it doesn't matter what the president says. It will not happen.
So how do you deliver results in this kind of situations and expect change? Because if we continue to have, I know they say culture will eat strategy for breakfast anytime.
I don't agree, by the way.
But you don't agree? No, you can actually say why you don't agree, because that is also in the public domain, that culture will eat strategy for breakfast. It depends on the way a society behaves and all of that. So if we're having this challenge, how do we now deliver results? That is the issue. Okay.
So like I said, with political will, you have the executive, you have the political party, you have the legislature, and again, if the legislature are not interested, it's not going to happen. So how do you deliver change? You take leadership from the top, and that leadership forms a coalition of people that believe in the same things. So these various bastions of power, the president calls the Senate president. He calls the chairman of the political party and says, look, there may be other things, and there are things I might overlook, but you see these 8 things, you need to support me to deliver them. And it doesn't matter what, and I think it's only when you have all of those things that you actually have real political will. Political will by the president alone is not enough. So you need a coalition of people who are jointly committed to delivering a particular agenda. If it's just, like I said, use the example of restructuring in the last government. Everybody talked about restructuring. They even set up committees to talk about restructuring. Well, because the will was not there, it just never happened.
Now, let's talk about good governance, and because all those things we're talking about is also about how to ensure good governance. Are there best practices that we can actually borrow from? Because, we're saying that things may work fairly in Nigeria, things may not work because of this, but are there other climes where we can borrow lessons and perhaps I always say this thing on the show, to Nigerianize them so that it works for us. That's one, because I'm seeing the time we have to go soon. The other issue is around public participation and getting good feedback for this administration. How should this administration manage information and, you know, gauging what people are saying? For example, the president said at the time, let my people breathe. You're seeing it all over social media. I even said, President, your people are not breathing, we are not smiling. Nigeria is happening to us now. You know, so, but how does this administration take all this information, cascade it and say, and look at even these 8 priority areas and say, these are where my people are not being satisfied. So those 2 questions.
Okay, so the first one is about you know, good governance and what needs to be done. And let me just say that good governance is essentially about the responsibility that the government has to deliver the things that the people have a right to expect. So as a citizen, I have a right to expect certain things from my government, and the government has a responsibility to deliver those things. So we need to be clear about that. It's a relationship between responsibility and rights. Okay, so nobody is doing anybody a favor. We've voted people into government. They are spending public money. We've donated all our power to them, and we have a right to expect them to do certain things. So, yes, the examples of good practice is where the interest of the public is put first, above every other interest. Okay. So it's when you start to think about, my people cannot breathe, they can't even afford to take Okada, so I will not buy a 160 million naira vehicle for each legislator. It's when you start to think like that, that you start to reflect on good governance. So put the people, the interest of the citizens as a whole first. If you can do that, you'll start to get good governance.
The question around information management.
The information management in government has traditionally been weak, traditionally. And it's a good thing that with the tracking of the deliverables, there's actually an app through which the citizens can actually report or offer opinions about how those priorities are going. And many civil society organizations similarly have you know, tracking apps. So I'll encourage my sister Hadiza to involve civil society, so that you're not just getting the report of performance against the deliveries from inside, from government, but the public are also contributing.
Doctor, just a few seconds. I want to ask this question before we go. The coordination amongst, between the FG and the states, because at the end of the day, Nigerians are in the states, and businesses are done in the states. How do we look at that very quickly?
The vice president has a key role as the chair of the National Economic Council, where all of the state governments sit with the federal government. And so he would have a really important role, making sure that the states are aligned with where the federal government is going. Having said that, it's a federation. Each state can do what they like, but like I said, you can build a coalition of like minds and deliver greater benefits.
Thank you very much for coming. I hope it will not take another 2 or 3 years before I get to see you again here on the show. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Nancy.
All right, I've been speaking with Dr. Joe Abah, who is a former Director General of the Bureau for Public Service Reforms at the BPSR. He's the country director of DAI. I'll be talking about the cabinet retreat. I think I've had a very good conversation with you in the last 40 or so minutes. Be the best you can be. Be the change you want to see. I am Nancy Naja. I'll see you all again tomorrow. AIT Reports is next.